There's a doctrine within Islam where Muslims generally believe that all the prophets enjoyed a Isma, a protection against sin, and that they were accordingly sinless. But that's not actually what the Quran teaches about the prophets. We're going to look at it. We're going to start with Abraham in Surah chapter 26, verse 82. He says, "And who I aspire that he will forgive me my sin on the day of recompense." So it's quite clear that Abraham is asking God for forgiveness, therefore he's not sinless. Let's go on. We can now look at Moses in Surah 28, verse 15. He says, "And he entered the city at a time of inattention by its people, and found therein two men fighting, one from his faction and one from among his enemy. And the one from his faction called for him to help him against the one who was from the enemy. So Moses struck him and killed him. Moses said, This is from the work of Satan. Indeed, he is a manifest misleading enemy." 28:16 says, "He said, My Lord, indeed I have wronged myself, so forgive me." The implication, of course, is that he sinned, and he forgave him. Indeed, he is the forgiving, the merciful. So once again, we have Abraham admitting to sin and Moses admitting to sin. So there's two prophets there that have sinned. But we're going to look at the most important prophet in Islam, and it's Muhammad, and he has sinned like it's going out of style. Because there's even hadiths where he talks about needing to repent at least 70 times a day. But we're going to address something else. We can see in Surah chapter 40, verse 55, it says, "So be patient, O Muhammad. Indeed, the promise of Allah is truth. And ask forgiveness for your sin and exalt with praise of your Lord in the evening and the morning." So it's quite clear that Allah is telling Muhammad to ask forgiveness for his sins. Therefore, Muhammad has sinned. Therefore, he is not sinless. Let's continue on. 47:19. "So know, O Muhammad, that there is no deity except Allah, and ask forgiveness for your sin and for the believing men and believing women, and Allah knows of your movement and your resting place." So it's quite clear that Muhammad is supposed to ask for forgiveness for his sins and for the Muslim community as well. Once again, so Muhammad has admitted to sinning twice here. Let's look at another reference. We're going to look at Surah chapter 48, verse 1 and 2. It says, "Indeed, we have given you, O Muhammad, a clear conquest." Then it says in verse 2 there, it says, "Then Allah may forgive for you what proceeded of your," let's see, it says sins there, not errors. The Arabic clearly says sins. "And what will follow, and complete his favor upon you and guide you to a straight path." So it's quite clear that Allah is going to forgive Muhammad of his past sins and his future sins as well. So Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad have all sinned according to the Quran. Let's continue on to see what we find next. We're going to look at the biggest embarrassment in Islamic history, and before the Muslims start screaming in the comment section about it not being authentic, I will deal with that shortly. Just hang with me. So we're going to look at the Satanic verses, the actual incident, as recorded in Ibn Ishaq's Life of Muhammad. It says, "Now the apostle was anxious for the welfare of his people, the Quraysh, wishing to attract them as far as he could. It has been mentioned that he longed for a way to attract them, and that the method he adopted is what Ibn Hibd told me that Salim said. Ibn Ishaq told him from Yazid Zayd of Medina, from al-Qatari, when the apostle saw his people turned their backs on him, and he was pained by their estrangement from what he brought them from God, he longed that there should come to him from God a message that would reconcile his people to him. Because of his love for his people and his anxiety over them, it would be a delight to him that the obstacle that had made his task so difficult could be removed, so that he meditated on the project and longed for it, and it was dear to him that God would send down by the star when it sets. Your comrade errs not and is not deceived. He speaks not from his own desire. And when he reached his words, have you thought of Elat and El Usa and Manat the third, the other? Satan, when he was meditating upon it and desiring to bring to his people, put upon his tongue, these are the exalted, high-flying crane, whose intercession is approved. When the Quraysh heard that, they were delighted and greatly pleased at the way in which he spoke of their gods, and they listened to him, while the believers were holding that what their prophet had brought from their Lord was true, not suspecting a mistake or a vain desire or slip. And when it reached the prostration at the end of the surah, in which he prostrated himself, the Muslims prostrated themselves. Uh, Others who were in the mosque prostrated themselves. They heard the mention of their gods, so everyone in the mosque, believer and unbeliever, prostrated except al-Wadi al-Majra, who was an old man who could not do so. So he took a handful of dirt from the valley and bent over it. Then the people dispersed, and the Quraysh went out delighted at what had been said about their gods, saying, Muhammad has spoken of our gods in splendid fashion. He alleged in what he read that they are the exalted cranes whose intercession is approved. It says, the news reached the Prophet's companions who were in Al-Basana, it being reported that the Quraysh had accepted Islam. So some men started to return while others remained behind. Then Gabriel came to the apostle and said, what have you done, Muhammad? You have read to the people something I did not bring to you from God, and you have said what he did not say to you. The apostle bitterly grieved and was greatly in fear of God, so God sent down, for he was merciful to him, comforting him and making light of the affair. So that's just interesting to me, that God would make light of Muhammad giving satanic revelation to his people. Well, let's continue on. It says, he was making light of the affair and telling him that every prophet and apostle before him desired as he desired and wanted what he wanted, and Satan interjected something into his desire he had on his tongue. So let's stop there real quick. Allah is telling Muhammad that it's okay to give revelations from Satan because it happens to all the prophets. That's just flat out ridiculous, and it's a lie. Let's continue on. It says, thus God annulled what Satan had suggested, and God established his verse, i.e., you are just like the prophets and the apostles. Then God sent down, we have not sent a prophet or apostle before you, but when he longed, Satan cast suggestions into his longing, but God will annul what Satan has suggested. Then God will establish his verse, God being knowing and wise. Thus God revealed his prophet's grief, made him feel safe, safe from his fears, and annulled what Satan had suggested in the words used above about their gods by his revelation. Are you the males and the females? That were indeed an unfair division, the most unjust. They are nothing by names which your fathers gave him, as far as the words to whom he pleases and accepts. How can the intercession of the gods avail with him? And the last part here says, when the annulment of what Satan had put upon him, the prophet's tongue came from God, Quraysh said, Muhammad repented of what he had said about the position of their gods, with the law altered it and brought something else. Now those two words which Satan had put upon the apostles' tongue were in the mouth of every polytheist, and they became more violently hostile to the Muslims and the apostles' followers. Meanwhile, those of his companions who had left Abyssinia, when they heard that the people of Mecca had accepted Islam when they prostrated themselves with the apostle, heard when they approached Mecca that the report was false and that none came into the town without the promise of protection or secrecy. So it's quite clear that Muhammad gave revelation from Satan because he couldn't tell the difference between a revelation from Satan and a revelation from God. And then uh, Allah swoops in and comforts Muhammad and tells Muhammad that, it's okay, Muhammad, that you gave revelation from Satan because all prophets have done it, which is a complete load of trash. But now, before the Muslims start screaming about it not being authentic, let's actually look at what a Muslim scholar says who has actually studied this in depth. We're going to look at Shadib Ahmed's Before Orthodoxy, the Satanic Verses in Early Islam, page 2 and 3. He says, the Satanic Verses incident is the name given in Western scholarship to what is known in the Islamic tradition as the story of the cranes or the story of the maidens, which narrates the occasion on which the Prophet Muhammad is reported to have mistaken words suggested to him by Satan as being of divine communication. That is, of being part of the Quran. So it's saying that Muhammad did indeed mistake words from Satan as divine from God. So it's quite clear that Muhammad couldn't tell the difference between what God's saying and what Satan's saying. But he goes on and says, these satanic verses praise the pagan deities of the prophet's tribe and acknowledge their power to intercede with the supreme God. By uttering these satanic verses, Muhammad thus committed the error of compromising the fundamental theological principle of the divine message of which the messenger, namely the absolute and exclusive utility of the one God Allah. This study of the satanic verses incident in the historical memory of the early Muslim community will demonstrate in detail that the incident constituted the absolute standard element in the memory of early Muslims of the life of their prophet. In other words, the early Muslim community believed almost universally that the Satanic Verses incident was a true historical fact. As far as the overwhelming majority of the Muslim community in the first 200 years was concerned, the Messenger of God did indeed, on at least one occasion, mistake words of satanic suggestion as being of divine inspiration. For the early Muslims, the Satanic Verses incident was something entirely thinkable. So this Muslim scholar is saying the earliest Muslims believed this was a historical event in the life of the prophet, and yet today the Muslim community screams and shouts that it's not authentic. Well, they don't want to deal with the actual history of this story within early Islam, because the earliest Muslims, according to this Muslim scholar, is that it was an authentic story. So Muslims, what are you going to do with this? So I want to reiterate that it's quite clear that according to the Quran, that Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad all sinned, and then of course Muhammad fails in spectacular fashion because he doesn't know the difference between the voice of God and the voice of Satan. So it's quite clear that uh, the God of Islam did not actually protect his prophets from making sinful choices. So therefore, the Muslim prophets, of course, are not sinless